Thank you for joining us this evening for Alumni Weekend 2017, and for our keynote speaker, UC Santa Cruz alumna Carmen Perez. Alumni Weekend is the highlight of our year, so we're very excited about this weekend. Bringing hundreds of alumni from all over the country back to campus. It's a wonderful opportunity to reconnect with friends and faculty and to spend time on our beautiful campus. So with that, it's my real pleasure to introduce Chancellor George Blumenthal. As many of you know, Chancellor Blumenthal is a distinguished scholar of astronomy and astrophysics. As Chancellor, he is the campus's #1 advocate. He joined UC Santa Cruz in 1972 as a faculty member and was named Chancellor in September of 2007. In short, this man knows us. He's been working to support the campus and our students for 45 years now. With that, please welcome our Chief Banana Slug, Chancellor George Blumenthal.
The campus and the community have so much in common. Maybe because 19,000 of UC Santa Cruz alums have chosen to live in Santa Cruz. This year's keynote speaker, Carmen Perez, speaks to the values that we share: social justice and social action, making the world a better place. Here in Santa Cruz and across the country, we're seeing an amazing thing. Levels of engagement and social action like nothing that I can remember. For example, the March for Science last weekend. Can you believe it? We actually had to march for science. The Climate March in DC this weekend. And of course, I'll let the people clap for the Climate March. And of course, the incredible Women's March on Washington in January. There were hundreds of marches around the country and around the world that day, including 10,000 marchers right here in Santa Cruz. And it gives me great pride to know that Carmen, one of our own, helped make it all happen as the co-chair of the Women's March. Carmen spoke at the march and helped define the core principles of the march: social justice, environmental protection, reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, and civil rights among them. Talk about a force for good in this world. And think about it, she credits UC Santa Cruz for helping shape her future and her decision to dedicate her life to social change. Carmen has said that the Chicano feminism class she took from Aida Hurtado was a political and spiritual awakening for her. What a mentor Carmen had. Aida influenced hundreds of UC Santa Cruz students before she was stolen away, before she moved to UC Santa Barbara, where she holds an endowed chair in the Chicano Studies Department. Aida is an inspiring role model, a professor dedicated to her students, to research that makes a difference, and to social justice. And by the way, she spoke at the Women's March as well. I even saw her on TV, and afterwards I kidded her about how pleased I was to know a rock star. So please welcome to the stage Professor Aida Hurtado.
It almost makes me want to come back. I am very, very pleased to be able to introduce our speaker today, Carmen Perez. She's the Executive Director of the Gathering for Justice, an organization building a movement to end child incarceration and working to eliminate racial inequalities in the criminal justice system. We are very proud that Carmen is one of our graduates with a BA in psychology, my old department, and a product not only of UCSC, but also of our local progressive organizations like Barrios Unidos, under the leadership of another UCSC alum, Dani Alejandres, who's actually here. And it was in Barrios Unidos that Carmen met Harry Belafonte, a collaborator with Nane in mobilizing against violence in our communities and in decreasing incarceration. One of the things I love most about UCSC is the collaborative nature of our teaching of our young, brilliant students. Carmen was also mentored and taught by Dr. Craig Haney in the psychology department, who is a worldwide expert on challenging conditions of solitary confinement and decreasing incarceration. How is it that among the many individuals at UCSC who had a significant impact on Carmen's education, did I get chosen for the honor of introducing her today? Well, let me tell you a story of what I call my Forrest Gump moment. Just happened to be next to Madonna, and that catapulted me to all kinds of, it was like, there I am standing, and there's Madonna, and I go. So Carmen Perez was one of the head organizers of the Women's March, as Chancellor Blumenthal indicated, held in Washington, D.C. on January 21st, 2017, one day after the presidential inauguration. Many years before the Women's March, Carmen was my undergraduate research assistant after she took my undergraduate course in Chicana feminisms at UCSC. She graduated with a BA in psychology, and we kept in touch over the years, as well as meeting at various activist events in New York City, where she is working. Carmen fought hard to have the Women's March be sensitive to the core of Chicano feminisms, which advocates it for an intersectional approach to feminist organizing. That is, to include social justice issues as they intersect with women's issues. The program for the Women's March took this intersectional approach, and many constituencies were represented in the selection of speakers. Thanks to Carmen, I was lucky enough to be included as well. During the Women's March, being the teacher that I am, I asked Carmen to explain to my students that I left behind in California to attend the march, to explain to the students left behind how can intersectionality take an activist perspective. And so in the middle of all this chaos, I said, that's why you have an iPhone. I'm gonna videotape you, and then I'm gonna mail it to all my students so they can have a moment with you. And she said, of course. So let me tell you what she said. And here we are in the middle of the Women's March. And actually, our son is in the background. You'll see him pointing to us. It was kind of cool. So here's what she said.
No, I get it. Yeah. It's just that labor always gets excluded and they get upset.
Tell us how you decided to organize this from an intersectional perspective and what that entails.
So my expertise has been criminal justice for the past 20 years, but as women or just as human beings, we're not one-dimensional. We are intersectional human beings. We live in poverty. If we are deported, we don't have access to reproductive justice rights. If we are incarcerated, we don't have access to quality education. So we have to be really intentional about being intersectional, about stepping out of our issue expertise and really finding our liberation bound with others, whether it's climate change, reproductive justice, immigration reform, criminal justice reform, all the indigenous rights, all these different things impact us all. And so instead of working in silos, we got to coordinate our efforts a little bit better and be more intentional about intersectionality.
Good.
I said, boy, was she paying attention 20 years earlier in my lecture. Needless to say, the Women's March was a chaotic, albeit peaceful event with over 500,000 people in attendance and millions worldwide. The program was running a little late, so actually a lot late. So mostly because of the enthusiasm, of the speakers, and because unscheduled guests like Madonna. So I thought I wasn't going to get a chance to deliver my remarks. I had already put away my little typed speech and was simply enjoying the program when Carmen called me on stage just as Madonna was beginning to deliver her remarks, and I was standing behind her, thus the Forrest Gump moment. So Carmen told me not to leave because I was next. As I saw this young woman juggle so many demands and yet had the presence of mind to honor her professor, I felt a surge of pride for what we teach at the university. I also felt that our public education in California is so precious and so extraordinary. I ditched my prepared remarks and decided to highlight Carmen's educational success. Many times the academy is criticized for being esoteric and out of touch, but yet this young woman took the writings of feminists and implemented them to help organize an event that will be one of the most important ones, perhaps, in the history of this country. So I went for the moment and spoke in defense of books, which our newly elected president famously stated he has no time to read, in defense of ideas and young people's dedication and vision in implementing them and the ideas that they learn in public education. I was so honored to have been on that stage with Carmen, and I acknowledge that it's not often that professors get to witness their students' success before their very own eyes. The entire event was magical. So shortly after the march, I sent the following email to Carmen, thanking her for her activism and extraordinary leadership. And I said, you and your compañeras put intersectionality and Chicano feminisms on the world map and in the history books. Quite an accomplishment. Together with Carmen's accomplishments, we must also recognize the incredible personal sacrifices and dangers in her activism. It takes courage and fierceness to do what she does. I'm sure she misses her family in California, and that confronting authority is not romantic and without terror. I want to celebrate her triumphs at the same time that I honor her commitment and the cost involved. I want to end this introduction by pointing out two of her most recent accomplishments. Her photo is now in the Center for Civil and Human Rights. She's very, very proud of that. And she and her compañeras were selected as part of the Time magazine's 100 Most Influential People that just happened. But I want to say that although Carmen's accomplishments and commitments are indeed impressive, and that forever she will do her family, her community, and UCSC proud, as a teacher, in my heart of hearts, Carmen, in my mind's eye, will always be that young student in my class and later in my research lab who asked the hard questions, took the hard answers, and converted her education into a political movement for social justice. But most of all, she will always, always be a slug. You have little cards where you can write your questions, so they told me to remind you to do that because slugs get in the moment and, we just don't pay attention to logistics.
Thank you. I love you. I love you too. That was beautiful. It's so nice to be back. I need like a moment. I'm like a little emotional watching all of that. How's everyone doing? I am just going to set my timer. I usually do this because I am becoming like my mentor, Harry Belafonte, and I could actually talk for hours. So I have a time that I need to keep, and so I'm going to put that right there. But it's truly an honor to be here. Do I need this? I don't think I do? Okay. I have a mic on my ear, so I'm assuming I could use that. Okay. Because I like to move. But it's truly an honor to be here with all of you. I just returned from going into 2 prisons earlier today. It's usually when I come back home to Santa Cruz, I go back to where my heart is, and that's to work with people that are incarcerated and to see my brothers and sisters that are locked up. But I just want to say thank you, Aida, for that beautiful introduction. Aida was not only my professor, she was somebody that I looked up to and who I wanted to be like. And there were moments when I used to think Aida didn't like me, like any other student, right? You get into a classroom, the teacher kind of is like not understanding why you're late and why you didn't turn in your work, and they don't understand that, you know, it took you forever to like get to campus because you were trying to take a nap because you partied too hard the night before. And so I used to think like that Aida didn't like me, but I knew it's because she saw something in me. And I knew it was because she actually probably saw herself in me. And so she was really hard on me when I was younger, but she was hard because she knew that if she gave me the tools at that moment, that I would run with them and build what we were able to do January 21st. And so I want to thank you. And I also want to thank you, Chancellor Blumenthal, for your leadership, for continuing to create an environment where students actually thrive, and for educating me as to the name of College 8. I believe it's Rachel Carson College now. So thank you for that information. I also want to thank Howard, who was extremely persistent. Where's Howard? Thank you, Howard, for being persistent and getting me back to UC Santa Cruz. It feels good when people appreciate your work, and also for working with Bree, my assistant, who is a young woman who I see myself in as well. Bree is my assistant who lives in Singapore, but she graduated from Yale and is 22 years old. And so when I see Bree, I see myself because I see how hungry she is. And so she made sure that I got here. And so she worked closely with Danielle and Kristen. So thank you, wherever you all are. And I don't know what's going on with the mic, but I'm going to try to move out the way. I want to share with you all how I got here. Because I didn't get here because I magically showed up on November 9th. You know, I know people want to think that, right? There's so many people that just woke up. And that's great. What I say to people is welcome, because there's a place for you. But there was a journey that got me to the place that I am, and it really started with my childhood. I grew up in a farm town outside of LA by the name of Oxnard, California. Not Oxford, Oxnard. And it was a community that had 3 naval bases. And so I grew up with individuals that were Samoan, that were African American from the South, that were Filipino, Chicanos, and also a lot of migrant workers. But in my community, there was a lot of violence. And that, for me, was just the way of life. There was violence, there was gang violence, there was drugs, there was alcohol, and then there was also violence in my home. And so, luckily, I had the opportunity to play basketball. I played ball from the age of 5 to college. And there was a person who came into my community and provided a positive outlet for me. And so although there was things happening at home, he taught me 5 things. And these values are something that I cherish and I carry with me wherever I go. He taught me never give up, dedication, determination, confidence, and family. And every time we would huddle, we used to have to say those 5 things. And I remember at the age of 7, 8, 9, 13, you're not trying to have 5 things that you say in the huddle because you want to, you just want to move on. You want to play the game. But I was never going to become a professional basketball player. So what he was teaching me were values. He provided a positive environment for me to not get caught up in what was happening at home or in my community. And so we need people like that. And oftentimes we don't see them when we're younger. We don't realize that they're mentors or they're femtors or they're angels that come into our lives. And so because of my coach, Pat Bell, everything that I went through had a solution and had a positive outcome. And so although I used to get hit with sometimes my own trophies, my coach would always say, "Run it off, Perez." And so because I would always have to run it off, I became a really good track star. I was always running on the court. I was always doing the suicides. I was like, take a lap. It was because he knew that I needed something. And so I always think about Pat Bell and the Pat Bells in my life. And so I want to be the Pat Bells to other young people. And then, unfortunately, at the age of 17, on January 21st, 1994, I remember walking into a church. And as I'm walking down the aisle, I see an open casket. And there's a birthday cake, and there are balloons everywhere. And it said, "Happy birthday, Carmen and Patricia." My sister had been killed a couple days before. Her and I were a day apart. She was 2 years older than me. And they were burying her on my birthday, on my 17th birthday. And so when I think about what I learned in college, I studied psychology. I didn't study criminal justice, which has been my path in my career. I studied psychology to understand why I wasn't a statistic. I studied psychology for self-healing. I was never going to be a psychiatrist. That really wasn't going to be my path. But I wanted to understand human behavior. And I remember thinking about my sister, and I remember watching my father. It was the first time I had ever seen a man cry. I'd never seen my father cry. I'd never seen my older brothers cry. It was the first time I had seen my father cry. And I remember somebody coming to our home asking if they wanted to press charges. And my father said, "I will never take another mother's child away." And so I didn't learn restorative justice from studying it. I learned it from a man who never wanted to take another mother's child away. That must have been the most profound thing that I had ever heard. Imagine that, losing your daughter at the age of 18, turning 19, and you have to make a decision about the future of somebody else. And I remember being mad. I was like, "What you mean? That person deserves to rot in prison. He took my sister. My life will never be the same." I was angry, and my brothers wanted to do something that would have probably landed them in prison too. But my father told us, "You will never bring her back. You will never bring her back. Don't mourn her loss, mourn her life. Do something with yours. You have life." 17 years old, you don't want to hear that, right? 17 years old, you're like, eh. But that did something to me. Because as I was wanting to give up on life, take my life, because my sister and I were significantly younger than my older siblings. My older siblings are 14, 12, 8 years older than us. So her and I were raised like twins. And all of a sudden, I felt myself alone. I found myself alone with my parents. My father will be 93 years old on May 30th, and my mother is 73. But that man who had never had an education, who had never stepped foot into a classroom, taught me the biggest lesson. Live your life. Do something with it. You have that. And I also had 3 nieces and nephews. I had a niece and 2 nephews, and so I had 6 little eyes looking at me. The easy thing to do would have been to give up. But like Pat Bell taught me, never give up, regardless of what happens to you. And so what did I do? I wanted to end my life, and I did. I applied to UC Santa Cruz, and luckily y'all let me in. I wrote this compelling story, talked about that regardless of what I went through with my sister, I was still dedicated to my education. And so I came to UC Santa Cruz. I remember the morning leaving my home with my little Honda Civic, everything in the back of my car with one of my friends. He came to Cal College. I came to College 8. And we drove from Oxnard 5 hours. And I dropped him off. Then I went to my little dorm. And I was like, oh my God, this is like camping. This is like, there's like Bambi on campus. And it was the best thing I could have ever done. Santa Cruz healed me. I was able to transform all that pain into gifts. My Spanish teacher, Professor Carlos, would always be like, Carmen, why don't you know Spanish? I was like, I don't know. My parents didn't teach me, but teach me. Aida did not take any excuses as to why you were late to doing research and transcribing. Because our professors actually cared about us. And actually, my professors looked like me. That's not something that happens in other universities. But Santa Cruz was hard. And so, unfortunately, because my family had to pay for a funeral, I had to work while I was here. And so I became a EAOP academic intern. And so I was helping. I remember driving my little Honda Civic over the hill to San Jose, to a high school, Lincoln High School, so that I could help young people get into the UC system. And that was fulfilling. But those kids were going to be okay because they were already on the right track. I remember going over to Pescadero with Larry Trujillo to actually work with the migrant kids. But my passion was when I met another alumni from UC Santa Cruz who had created an alternative to incarceration by the name of Y-Corps, now called CRP. Anthony Propernick started an alternative to incarceration. And so I remember, because I needed a hustle and I needed a job, I interviewed at some local coffee shop. And he's like, you got the job. And I was like, okay. He's like, it's in Watsonville. I was like, where's Watsonville? And he's like, it's down 22 miles. And I was like, oh, so where the Target is? Because as a UC Santa Cruz student, you only knew where the Target was. You didn't know where Watsonville was. And so I have so many memories of being a student. And it wasn't just the campus, it was also the raccoons that would follow you when you were taking your trash out. And they'd bring their whole family. So we didn't have gang members at UC Santa Cruz, but we had raccoons. They would size you up. And so I was just glad that they were a lot smaller than the ones that were in my community. But Santa Cruz provided such a great opportunity for me, learning about Gloria Azaldúa, hearing about Angela Davis, learning about Jeffrey Canada, who started the Harlem Children's Zones, having speakers come talk to me. This is the type of environment that UC Santa Cruz created. But UC Santa Cruz also did something else for me. When I grew up in Oxnard, my brothers used to get racially profiled and they would get held at gunpoint by police. And I remember with my basketball uniform that would be red or blue, and I would tell the officers, "Sorry, officers, I just got out of a basketball game." They thought I was either a Crip or a Blood. And they would hog tie my brother, and I would sit on the curb, and I didn't understand. I didn't understand why my brother, who was such a good guy, would get hog-tied and held at gunpoint. Or when I would watch a drive-by shooting. And so what was interesting is that when I came to Santa Cruz, the cloud that had been over me had been lifted. And I was now able to name the injustice that I experienced as a child, taking Craig Haney's class and going to San Quentin and learning about solitary confinement and learning about the prison industrial complex. And I was like, I want more of that. Meeting Nane Alejandres in the community, writing a paper about him, and then I got to meet him and I was like, ooh, oh God. And I remember one time he said to me, "I see something in you." And I was like, uh-oh, I don't know what that means. What does that mean, I see something in you? And what's really interesting, I see something in young people all the time now. But this campus provided an opportunity for me to intern in organizations that were really about organizing and social justice. This university had somebody like Huey P. Newton in a PhD program. Some of our most revolutionary thinkers, not only as professors, but as students. And when I learned about Chicana feminism, I just didn't learn about Chicana feminism. I had to learn about white radical feminism. I had to learn about black feminism. I had to learn about the suffrage movement. Yes, I paid attention. I paid attention. Even though it didn't seem like I paid attention, I paid attention. And that's what allowed me to not only be somebody who worked at Barrios Unidos and think about how the policies that we export to Venezuela or to El Salvador impact our communities here. To work with the men at Tracy Prison to organize cultural and spiritual ceremonies with one of the most amazing mentors ever. To meet a Harry Belafonte. If it wasn't for UC Santa Cruz, I would have never met this man, and I would have never met Harry Belafonte, and I would never be standing here in front of you. I would have never known about what it felt like to be in a gym, gliding as though I was running on an ocean. What a blessing. And so for me, I needed the camp environment. I needed to speak to students who were community study majors, who were environmental justice majors, who were women's rights majors. Is that what it is now? I don't know if it's still women's studies. I needed that because that is what led to January 21st. 5 million people. Working at Santa Cruz County Probation, I just learned that Howard's wife, Cynthia Chase, was my fellow coworker there. Creating detention alternatives, organizing in communities all over the country, in communities that were not my own, Black communities, poor white communities, Asian Pacific Islander communities. sleeping on benches, sleeping on floors, being told, who the hell are you? You're too young to tell me what to do. What do you have to offer? Working with youth here in Santa Cruz that were addicted to drugs and alcohol, heroin, meth. Because I was one of those students that ended up staying 13 years after I finished. I stayed in this community because this community, even though I was born and raised in Oxnard, I did my growing up here. And so when I think about the work that I do in New York City, I think about the community that I had here. Although I belonged to College 8, I was always chilling at Oaks. Oaks folks? Oaks folks? Any Oaks folks? Yes, yes. But also, too, I was part of Rainbow Theater. Rainbow, rainbow. I was part of Poets Corner. I got to write about my sister's death. I got to write about police brutality. I got to write about that when I was 22 years old, 21 years old, and at the age of something, I'm not gonna tell you my age, okay, I will, 40. At the age of 38, at the age of 35, I am one of the top leaders working to fight against police brutality. All because of a theater program here at UC Santa Cruz. And so of course I'm gonna claim being a banana slug. Of course I'm gonna claim being from UC Santa Cruz. Of course, why wouldn't I? How many of you ever kissed a banana slug? Did they make you do that at EOP? Then you got a $500 stipend or something like that for your books. Do they still give those out? No? You don't have to kiss banana slugs? That's an ugly creature. But some of us did it, right? We needed that money. But all that to say is that whether I organized a march from New York City to DC, 250 miles, 9 days, 3 criminal justice reform bills, shedding light on police brutality, whether I was a probation officer working with an intensive caseload of gang girls here in Santa Cruz County, Commissioner of Latino Affairs here in Santa Cruz County, going to the prisons of El Salvador under the guidance and mentorship of NANE to reduce homicide in the country by 40%. Traveling across the country, organizing the Women's March, being intentional about intersectionality has a lot to do with many of the people in this room. Because what it takes people to show up. I could plan any event, but if people don't show up, what does it matter? 5 million on January 21st. And I'm not gonna tell you it was easy. I didn't need another job. I run a national organization for Harry Belafonte. I had just come off of organizing and building a coalition called Justice League California. I have one in New York City called Justice League NYC. We are artists, hip-hop artists, directors, communication directors, formerly incarcerated individuals, victims, direct service providers. We come together and we build power. Collective power. We see the value in everyone coming together. My team, we have our full-time jobs and everyone's a volunteer. But we come together like Voltron. We change policies. We march from New York City to DC. A little girl from the hood of Oxnard, a UCSC graduate alumni, led a march from New York City to DC. But we know the power of working together. We know the power of intersectionality. I don't know how to create memes, but my partners do. I know how to work on policy, I know how to organize protests. I organize them while I'm brushing my teeth. I just did one the other day, a day without a woman. Did anybody participate on? We put that together while we were in LA, 24 hours. We did a rally. That's why you see that arrest picture. I wasn't anticipating on getting arrested, as it looked like I was going to a Vogue shoot. But what I do know is that I want people who are part of my team who have heart. My coach taught me that having heart wins games. Defense wins games. And so I could teach you criminal justice reform. I could teach you about the law. I could teach you the penal code. I can't teach people how to have heart. And those are the people that I want on my team. It took a lot of heart to organize the Women's March. 70 national organizers, 4 national co-chairs, 400 state coordinators, 600 marches across the world, 5 million people. And it was not easy. We did that in 10 weeks. But all my career, everything that I had been exposed to, prepared me to be one of the national co-chairs of the Women's March. I was responsible for all the partnerships. I remember getting on the call with Dr. King's daughter, and she talked about her mom had brought 700 organizations to the original March on Washington. I said, ooh, I'm about to have 700. I was shy from 700 in 10 weeks. They had a year to plan that march. We had 10 weeks, and I brought on 561 organizations to partner with us in 10 weeks. Every single day I woke up, my face was either on a screen, Skyping into a community like this, or I was on the phone with 80 people of some type of diversity coalition, asking them to come on board. And for the first 3 weeks, you know what we got asked? Do you have the permit? Where's the permit? I don't know if you guys heard that. We were like, the permit is a process. It's not a physical paper. It's a process. Do you have the permit? Every organization, every person we talked to, we were getting heat from everyone. But let me tell you something about the Women's March. It was a woman by the name of Teresa Shook, who was a grandmother in Hawaii, who posted to 40 of her friends on Facebook and said, I'm marching to Washington, D.C. the day after number 45's inauguration. 40 people. She woke up the next day to find out that 10,000 people were marching with her. And what she said is, oh, I wasn't prepared for that. So she backed up. She said, I don't want to do this. So she gave her blessing to a woman by the name of Bob Bland, who's one of our other national co-chairs, because she had the nasty pussy or grab your pussy march. Somebody else had the nasty something march, and they all combined marches. But that was one day. That was November 10th. And on November 10th, they also had gotten a lot of backlash because they called it the Million Women's March, not recognizing that 25 years prior to that in Philadelphia, black women had organized a Million Women's March. So what does that say about us? Is that we need to learn our history. We need to learn about the suffrage movement, the Chicano movement. The Chicano movement wasn't led by Cesar Chavez. It was Corky Gonzalez. I know we look alike, but we're not the same people. Cesar Chavez led the United Farm Workers movement. There was also the American Indian movement. There was the Black liberation movement that was completely different than the civil rights movement. Dr. King did not lead the Black liberation movement. So we need to learn about the past. And I was able to learn that here at UC Santa Cruz because of professors like Angela Davis, because of professors like Aida Hurtado and Craig Haney and so many more. Because of that, I was able to learn about movements and not make the same mistakes as some of the people that put up a post. And so she gave her blessing, and on the 48th hour, I get a call. And I had just come off of organizing 2 concerts, a 3-day juvenile justice conference in Oxnard, and I was tired. I was like, I'm not gonna do anything else. I'm just gonna go back to New York City. I'm gonna sleep, because I need sleep, and I'm not gonna do anything. I'm gonna strategize for my organization so I could hopefully apply for some funding so that we won't have to do this work for free. But no, I got the call, and it was early in the morning, and it was a 3-way call with 5 other people and a woman named Tamika Mallory, who's one of my partners. And we got asked to join this march. And although I was tired and I wanted to say, no, I don't want to do this, I had no choice but to say yes. Why? Because number 45 specifically talked about my community, specifically talked about the communities that I cared about. And I felt it was my responsibility to ensure that the most marginalized communities were at the center of the Women's March. There was not going to be a Women's March without us protecting the most marginalized. And so I talked to my boss, Harry Belafonte. I said, hey, sir, you know, there's this women's thing that's happening. It's called the Women's March on Washington. I want to know if you could be an honorary co-chair and guide us. Then we talked to Gloria Steinem, to Dolores Huerta, to all these other individuals. And then we got to work. We got to work every single day, every single day. I was getting kicked out of my building at midnight. They would say, excuse me, you guys got to leave. And we're like, wait a second, one more call. California's not done. It's only 10 p.m. there. But we gave our heart. I gave my soul to the Women's March. And so then when the conversation shifted, because then everybody found out that we got the permit, thank God for the newspaper, then we started talking about what are we marching for? Is this an anti-Trump rally, or are you marching for something? And I remember stepping out of my criminal justice hat and thinking about what we needed to march for. And it was when I thought about my Chicana feminist class and intersectionality and being intentional about that. And so what did I have to do? I had to find some of the dopest leaders in different issues and bring them all together and ask them to do what? Step out of your issue expertise and come together to create a policy platform that is intersectional but centers women. And some people said yes, and others said no. And we created this transparent process through Google Docs so that everybody could see, in case somebody erased somebody's stuff, you could see who erased it. And we got on 4 conference calls, and 26 people committed to working on this policy platform. All I did was create a process. And it was called the most radical policy platform ever. And I remember at 4 a.m. before we released it, thinking to myself, what the heck am I doing? What am I doing? It's 4 a.m. I couldn't even see. I was cross-eyed. I remember just looking at my roommate. One of my roommates is here. She's a professor at Rutgers, and she makes me better. Her name's Tammy. But my other roommate, Cassidy, was our communications director. And I remember I was in my room on my computer, and I was looking at the same document while she was in the living room sitting there looking at the same document. We were done, we were tired, we hadn't eaten, we hadn't slept. You know, not only were we organizing the Women's March, we were also having conversations about race on Facebook Live. People were like, why are you having conversations about race? This isn't about race. We're like, we need to have conversations about race, but we also need to finish this policy platform. But I remember thinking, I was like, oh my God, I have failed because I didn't incorporate the piece that I'm passionate about, and it was criminal justice. And I called a friend in California, and I said, I need to read this to you. What else can I add? And he's like, you got this. He's like, just add a couple more things, you got this. It's done, let it go. And so we let it go. And then all of a sudden, there are so many people that had gone after us on Twitter. One, they said, why didn't you incorporate Hillary? Got a lot of Hillary supporters that came after us. We got a lot of other supporters that came after us. And it was a lot of just trolls. You guys know what trolls are, right? On Twitter. People that come after you, tell you they're gonna kill you, all this stuff. And so yes, this comes at a sacrifice, but it's a great sacrifice because I love what I do. I wake up every single morning grateful that I have the opportunity to change the world. That I was blessed regardless of what happened to me, regardless of what I didn't have or what I did have, that I am blessed to wake up every single day and have some of the best teams that I feel in America. My team that has my back, that makes me smarter, that I get to build political power with. We just won a campaign in New York State. 16 and 17-year-olds used to be automatically prosecuted as adults and were sent into adult facilities, Rikers. And after many years, children will no longer be sent to adult facilities in New York State. We also are going to be removing the 16 and 17-year-olds from the adult facilities. It'll take some time, but it's a campaign that we constantly were fighting for. And so as I'm planning the Women's March, because I know how to build teams, because my coach, Pat Val, taught me how to build a team, our organizing was still happening within Justice League and the Gathering for Justice. I didn't have to be there every single day to lead everyone. And that's what I encourage you all to do, is to find your lane. What do you love to do? How do you then take that back to the movement? When we think about coalition building, I know that we are raised to think about individual and work in silos. This is what working separately is. This is working together. This is how you build power. This is how you could knock down the systems of oppression, is by coming together. Look at the person next to you and look at their value. Don't wait for something to personally impact you to feel you have to make a difference in the world. Don't wait for somebody to harm you or your child or your loved one for you to get involved in something. Don't wait for Superman to come and save you, because he's not coming. Don't wait for Superwoman. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ones that we seek. And so as you go into your Alumni Weekend and you reconnect with people you haven't seen for a long time, think about the power you have. Think about the difference that you all make every single day, because I know there's change makers in this room. I'm not the only one at UC Santa Cruz that's making a difference in this world. I see Jasmine here. I used to work with her back in the day, collaborate with her when I was a little probation officer. A little probation officer. I'm not that much little. But, you know, it's about us coming together. It's about us talking to one another. No matter who you voted for, I don't care about that. What I care about is our shared humanity. What I care about is supporting communities that are in pain. I don't need to be Black or African American to care about Black lives. I don't need to be an environmental justice major in order for me to care about the farm workers that get sprayed pesticides and get cancer. I don't have to be that person. I don't have to be incarcerated to care about incarcerated people. I try to avoid being locked up, but they sometimes get me for civil disobedience. I don't have to be those things, but I know I have gifts. I have access. And I could be a bridge between the youth and the elders, those that have something and those that don't. I have gifts, and it's my responsibility to share them with all of you and with the world. There's a reason why I'm here today, and I am still trying to figure that out. But I hope that I could inspire you to remind you that you are all loved, you are necessary, and you are powerful. But you are more powerful together. We need all of you in this movement. I think all of you who showed up on January 21st, we need you to keep showing up. Keep showing up. Don't just show up when something personally impacts you. Show up for somebody else. Talk to your neighbor. How many of you know your neighbors? We don't know our neighbors. Talk to your neighbor. I just moved from Harlem to Washington, Hudson Heights. I don't know, I think it's called Washington Heights, but they're calling it Hudson Heights because it's a little bit closer to the Hudson River. Anyways, and I feel like knocking on everybody's door. I need to know my neighbors. I remember growing up and knowing, and I still remember Mr. Wilson and Miss Pando. All these people, I grew up with them, and now we don't really know our neighbors. What do you love to do? We need to think about the election cycle, right? How many of you all vote? Yes. How many of you all vote local elections? Yes. How many of you guys voted for, no, forget it. But again, just remember your greatness. Remember that it doesn't take a seasoned organizer to organize an event. We're all organizers. You organize your calendar every single day. That's an organizer. I remember when I was a job developer and people used to say, well, I don't have any secretarial skills. And I'm like, do you answer the phone at home? Yes. Do you take a message? Yes. There you go, right? It's not hard. We all have gifts. Some of us just go into different professions. It doesn't mean that we still can't connect with one another. We all love music, right? Some of us dance better than others, but we still love music. We still could connect to one another on a human level. It doesn't matter if I have straight hair, you have curly hair. I have light skin, you have dark skin. I'm tall, you're short. No, I'm short, you're tall. It doesn't matter. There's something special in all of us. And I am grateful that I'm able to stand here as an alumni of UC Santa Cruz and a banana slug, one of the most funkiest mascots in the world. But I will say, it was because of UC Santa Cruz, it was because of all the mentors and the femtors in my life that I've been able to do what I do. And I don't even know what my next step is. I still need to run an organization. I'm still trying to change policies. I'm still helping run the Women's March. We have an action that came out today. We have something happening on Mother's Day. We're still going to continue to resist. And the resistance includes all of you. When we talked about the Women's March, it was not absent of men. And I was taught that in Chicana feminism, because we as Chicanos were fighting alongside our husbands, our brothers, our uncles. So many men showed up for the Women's March. And it was the man that would ask me, could you sign this for my granddaughter? I was like, yes, thank you for coming. Excited. And we got criticized as the women of color. Tamika, Linda, and myself got criticized. We got called tokens. And there's nothing token about me, as you could tell. Speak my mind. I will let you know if I'm offended. I will have a courageous conversation with you, because it takes a lot of courage to talk about what makes us uncomfortable. But I know that I was also able to show a young girl that she could stand on that stage. I was able to show that little girl who had never seen anybody who looked like her stand on a stage and listen to my words. And so thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. I know you guys are going to enjoy it. I'm going to try to enjoy it with all of you. But thank you for being here. Thank you for showing up. And thank you for continuing to fight.